have the incredible privilege of having these wonderful women from Afghanistan, the United States, Britain, Kenya, and Mexico.
Let me first introduce the panel. On my far left, Lydia Cacho, an investigative journalist from Mexico who's been jailed, harassed, had death threats for writing about child prostitution rings and corruption in Mexico. On my immediate left is Philo Ikonya, now the president of PEN in Kenya, who's a writer and a journalist and a women's activist. On my immediate right is Urshad Manji, who's the director of New York University's Moral Courage Project and the author of The Trouble with Islam Today, published in nearly 30 countries. And on my far right is Malalai Joya, who's an Afghan politician, who as a member of parliament publicly denounced what she regarded as warlords and criminals in parliament and was suspended in 2007. We are immensely privileged to have these four extremely courageous women on the panel. The thing the authorities are most angry about is my voice, says Philo Ikonya. She's been involved in a number of protests and political readings recently and was arrested and severely beaten in police custody in February this year. She believes that the arrest and assault are related to her outspokenness on political matters. We have with us four extraordinary women from many corners of the world whose courage is exemplary. There's an old Chinese saying, which I'm sure you all know, women hold up half the sky. But women's voices are often absent, and that's a free expression issue in itself. I'm old enough to remember life in Britain in the 1950s, where women were extraordinarily marginalised, invisible, and not taken very seriously. The women's movement in my country did improve things, there's no doubt, but there's a long way to go in Britain and in many other places too. What's still so evident is that women's lives and preoccupations and their bodies and their desires count for less, and never more so when the sky falls in, when the chips are down, so that rape seamlessly becomes a weapon of war. Women's poverty combined with male power are the bedrock of sex trafficking and prostitution. The notion of male honour means that women cannot step out of line in their cultures without terrible consequences. And domestic violence is simply standard all over the world. In the UK, police get one call every minute about domestic violence. I couldn't sleep one night and listened on the World Service at about 3 o'clock in the morning to a story of how domestic violence had hugely increased in Gaza since the Israeli attack. Men were frustrated, out of work, miserable, hopeless. So some of them take it out on women. So on it goes. Women certainly hold up half the sky, but they don't have half the power. Their lives and their bodies are easily exploited, their voices and needs marginalised. Women can, of course, also do the censoring and silencing. It's often women who insist on clitoridectomies for their daughters. They can remain silent and risk further infection rather than admit to family members dying of AIDS. Women can even collude in honour killings, believing they're the custodians of virtue and cultural continuity in their communities. And that, of course, is the nub of the problem. If they censor, however monstrously, they say they do it to protect themselves and their daughters and their culture. And yet, ironically, it is often the misogyny embedded in the cultures they are protecting in the North and in the South that makes life so precarious for them in the first place. These four women on our platform are remarkable for standing up in their worlds, in their cultures, to power, to corruption, to the exploitation of women and children. They refuse to be silenced. I think the first question I'm going to ask each of you is, and I'll start perhaps with Lydia, is if you could perhaps talk about the incident or event that illustrated to you that there's something different about the issue of free expression for women.
I guess it was when I was like 5 years old, when my father is the son of a military man and my mother was a feminist French psychologist living in Mexico. So my mom would tell us that we had the freedom to say anything, and my father would tell us that girls wouldn't talk back to anyone. And so I had all this contradictory messages in my house, and I remember all the time telling my father, that's not right, I don't like that, I don't want to do this or that. And I wasn't being rude, I was just being free. And then one day my father called me when my mother wasn't around, and he sat down with me and he said, listen, Lydia, you have to obey, even though if you don't like it, because that's the way it is. You're going to suffer a lot if you don't obey me. And I said, no, you are going to suffer a lot if I don't obey you. So we had to wait for my mom to come home and discuss these issues. And that's the way we grew up, with 3 girls and 3 boys in my house. And I guess I just knew that there was something different, and I have spent 46 years trying to understand why, and I haven't.
Interesting. What about you?
For me, the voice that rings constantly in my mind and in my heart is the voice of my grandmother. She was very different from all the village women. We used to sort of see grandma, I describe her like a performance, a drama that was live all the time, because she kept on always defining herself. And it just rang in me all the time, because she'd constantly say, my name is Njeri Wagithia Kenya, because very often women are used to being called the mother of so-and-so, the mama, very many tags, and in the end you don't really have a name. And identity became crucial for me, because I grew up hearing my grandmother coming home to see my mother. We were 10 of us, originally 6 girls and 4 boys. And my grandmother went against the grain all the time. And she told my father things in the face, things that I never heard my mother say. My grandmother would look at my father and say, if you think you can do this to my daughter again, I'm going to take her. I really don't care about how many children she has for you, and she can't live in a house like this. By the way, I would have done a better thing for her, and my name is Jerry Wagithia Kenya. And it became really a song in me, because we just watched and we loved her when she came. And she drank and she chose her drink. She said, don't bring me that. You bring me the other drink. That's the one I want to drink tonight. And I'm having it in my room. And she was absolutely the opposite of anything I ever saw in anybody else. And my mother was timid. My mother's story is very beautiful. Very strong, but very different from my grandmother, who was obviously, later on I had to say, a politician, an activist, and is me in many ways, because she went then into learning languages, which she was very good at. Naturally, she's picked up a bit of English, Kiswahili, and my mother tongue, Kikuyu, and she showed off about it. That was the other difference. As she said, if you think that you can't face that person because they speak in English, bring them here. And then she'd do things like, is that the chief? Tell him that I, Jerry Wagithia Kenya, have said that he can't do this. And you're like, who is this woman? But the question doesn't come consciously to me. It didn't come till much later, when I started writing and I heard that my grandmother is in me. My grandmother sings in me. And then my mother told me things, and village women. She's dead now. She's buried in the hills of a place called Kilimambogo, very proudly, outside of her ethnic enclave, alone. And she said to my mother, don't bother so much about bringing me to your better house now that your husband has made you a better house. If I fall sick, I'll send someone to call you, and if you don't come in time, I'll have gone where other people go. And please bury me on the hills of Kilimambogo, because I was tired of living in a shack in a little town. Don't bring me back to the city. I'm very happy. And I needn't go on, but I need to say this, that in 1939, my grandmother made friends with an ambulance driver. She chose her men friends. She's on tape saying that she chose to be a single mother by choice. I mean, they came for her, and she told her father, take back the dowry. I like this man. I will have a child with him who is my mother. But I don't like him for his bandy legs, and I hope your mother my child won't have bandy legs. And I said, she say these things? She was more liberated than I am. So she put on trousers in 1939, the ambulance driver's trousers, and went to the town. And it's on record and in living memory that she came to town in trousers to tell the people that she didn't think the thinking was in the trousers, it was in the head. So, yeah.